under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk, give us a roll call, please.
President Norris.
Here.
Vice President Young.
Here.
Secretary Spikers.
Here.
Commissioner Herron.
Here.
Commissioner Pollard.
Here.
Do I have an approval, a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
Second.
We approve the agenda.
Pardon? Okay, so is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, then we will vote. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Disapprove? Nay? No nays, the ayes
I'm
have it.
sorry, who seconded? Joan, you moved. Who seconded?
I believe I did. but-
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Public comment, do we have any public comment today? No public comments, so we will move on to topics of discussion. And today we're going to work on the affiliation proposal review and evaluation. And I think Sarah is going to lead that for us.
I'm going to kick us off, and then Steve and I are going to tag team most of this.
Sarah, can I interrupt for just a moment?
Yes,
The
please.
only reason I'm interrupting is I'm on the agenda.
Yes, to start us
To
off
start us
with
off.
a few
Where was
comments, please do.
This is on the work study, the next page.
Yes.
I
Okay.
just have a few things I'd like to say as introductions for this evening. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to everybody around this table for going through the proposal and for scoring the proposal. You'll see in the presentation from Sarah, summary scores for the group, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time to go through this proposal. It's not a favorite bedtime read. It's it's technical. It's
It will put you to sleep.
well, a good point. So I appreciate people diving into the proposal and coming to an understanding of it. A second, I'd like to say, and this is for the benefit of the public, that tonight we have copies of the proposal available. It is a copy that has been dutifully redacted according to the request in the proposal, and so the vast majority of the proposal is non-redacted. There are only a couple of paragraphs and some financials that are at this point redacted, so the public can get a very good feel of what is in this proposal tonight. We've made those copies available. And then and Sarah's going to probably make this point too, so our task tonight is to understand one another with respect to our impressions of this proposal. And I'm being very specific about our impressions of the proposal as opposed to our impressions of the proposer. Those are two very different tasks. Tonight we're trying to understand whether or not the proposal matched up well with the RFP. And then based on our impressions, we may get to another phase of this project where we are able to understand the proposer a little bit better. So that's our task tonight, is to compare the RFP and the proposal. Sarah?
Great, thank you. I did want to just point out when updated this, that this wasn't updated. Okay, I need to mention that.
Oh. Sarah?
Yes.
Just one more sidebar, sorry.
Okay.
So the slides.
It's a 3:05.
Oh,
Now
yeah,
it's
yeah,
4:05.
oh, okay, I missed that, okay, yeah.
Okay. So, tonight's objectives are to recap where we are in the process. We won't spend too much time on that. To review and complete the initial evaluation of the proposal. As a group, give you the opportunity to share your impressions and have some dialogue about that. to finalize questions for what we're calling the information gathering phase, which would be, if you all agree, toward the end of this evening, our next step in this process. And then to have you take a look at what we've mapped out in terms of next steps and milestones in the process, and make sure that you're comfortable moving ahead. So just a reminder about our group agreements: suspend assumptions, listen, don't reload, balance advocacy with inquiry, so be curious, attribute positive intent, and of course, Steve and I will do our best to tightly facilitate this so that we can move things along and get Commissioner Speckers to his tournament on time. So just recapping a little bit where we are in the affiliation engagement process. We've had a planning and preparation phase, which began several months ago. Then we had a phase of really defining what you all held most dear in terms of your guiding principles and goals, and what you were looking for, and articulating what was important in a partner and in the RFP. And now we are here at phase 3 with the evaluation of a proposal. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Steve for a couple of minutes. Walk us through the next segment.
So as Tom mentioned, the purpose here this evening is to evaluate the written proposal and how it responds to the objectives and the criteria that we had set out as part of the RFP process. Now, I think we have to keep in mind a couple things. We'll have every opportunity to ask questions, and I'll be specific. The first round of questions we have kind of outlined. We'll discuss that with you, and we'll get feedback from you this evening. And I say that's the first round of questions because, as you know, we'll have opportunity for many more opportunities to ask questions along the way. So I think that's one. And then the other thing that I would keep in mind is if we find some areas of concern, which we will, we have the opportunity to build protections for the district in that, in how we structure any type of an agreement. So we may look at things, we may have some concerns. Certainly there's more information to be gathered, but then if we do have some concerns in the end, there are protections that we can build as we look at that as well. So, as you know, there's a lot of information in the RFP, and we've just tried to highlight some things here for you, and we'll have you, we'll give you the opportunity to give us feedback and see if we captured everything sufficiently, or if you have other key areas that you'd like to highlight for us. But first of all, and I'm going to go into a little more depth on a couple of these, so this particular slide I'll go through pretty quickly. But there were two options proposed. One was a lease purchase option, and then there was an outright asset purchase. Now, with the lease purchase option, I would just be clear, we had essentially requested a lease arrangement or a purchase arrangement, but what came back was a lease arrangement with a purchase option or an outright purchase option. The proposal addressed the key goals for affiliation, and as you know, key to that was a revenue bond debt service, taxes in excess of the LTGO debt service. Again, I'll come back to a few of these. Ongoing capital investment, maintaining the district's assets, growth in services, scope, size, geography, accountability with ongoing reporting to the district, and then also brand recognition compared to the RFP recipients. And in response to that, Regional Health was speaking to launching a rebranding effort for their system. So I think that was something that came out clearly in their proposal. And then a commitment to growing the local service offerings and partnering with the district on community health offerings. So many of the key things that we were asking about, our desire to continue to provide community health, there were provisions in there for that. Our concern that the ability to use excess tax revenues, there were provisions for that. When you think about it, it didn't have to come back that way, but I thought it was quite favorable in terms of response in many areas like that.
Can I just jump in, because I think the one bullet point on the brand recognition was their own acknowledgement actually in the proposal that they don't have a very recognizable brand due to the kind of the youth of their system, and that's really the purpose of going through this rebranding process.
Good point, Sarah. I think I went over that too. And then, as you recall, there was a section of the proposal that was entitled Regional Health Transaction Provisions. And included in that, the long-term lease with terms and lease rate equal to the debt service on the outstanding revenue bonds. So their proposal was, and that was a key objective of ours, that they would assume full responsibility for the revenue bonds and the debt service. Now, key to that is they would assume the entire revenue bond balance. Also, in terms of this long-term lease, they would operate and bear the risk of operations, so they would be at risk fully for operations. The agreement would include all real and tangible assets and health delivery processes. So again, it would be all-encompassing in that regard. And then, as I mentioned before, that they would have the option to acquire the hospital at the time the bonds became callable. So, and that would be at their option. So, then in the second option, the outright purchase of SVH, the provision that they had for that was essentially the district would establish a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, would transfer all of the assets and liabilities into that corporation, and then there would be essentially and then the district would be the sole member, which is essentially ownership terminology for a not-for-profit. The district would be the sole member of that not-for-profit corporation, and there would be a member substitution that would then put regional health into the sole member. So essentially, they would take over responsibility for all of the assets and all of the liabilities of SVH.
Including the LTGO?
Not including the LTGO.
Okay, you mentioned that.
No.
I said all of the liability.
Very good point. And thank you, Jake, because it does not include the LTGO, as you recall from reading the proposal.
All future liabilities, and they indemnify the hospital district for any of their own issues that arise.
I think that's what we'll have to get clarification on. The LTGO issue was addressed in there that they would not assume that. David, I don't think it addressed the other, but that's what we have to get clarification on. Oops, too fast. Then, I think other areas that were covered was the commitment to physician recruitment and training, excess levies, and this is a point that I touched on earlier. The specific wording was beyond amounts needed for district operations and wellness activities, which is the kind of activities that you would like to provide, for your community. Anything beyond those amounts would be pledged to SVH for operations and/or capital. And then the district board would retain legally required functions, and that's including the approval of tax levies, approval of tax increases, and sale of district assets. And the provisions were in there because one of the things we had talked about, you can't be the district commissioners and either through lease, well, primarily through lease, turn over responsibility of your assets and not have a mechanism or an avenue to make sure they're being properly maintained and taken care of. So, and that may be an area that needs to be addressed further, but the provisions that were addressed in the proposal as it is now, periodic reporting of SVH activities to the district board, and I believe that was quarterly as they were proposing it. So frequently enough that you could be assured and be actively involved in how they're running it and whether they're maintaining your assets. And then annual approval of any tax support to be pledged by the district in support of SVH. And so, again, there, anything that, any additional tax monies that would go, as we said, the provision, if you didn't use the excess levies for district operation or wellness activities, if that was to be pledged to SVH, then that would be done on an annual basis. And then lastly, the potential for collaborative efforts with Puget Sound providers. And that was one of the areas that they touched on a couple different times in terms of the potential and the developing relationships that they have with local area providers. So I think that's the highlights. Sarah will cover more some of the feedback that we got and some of the observations. But I think first, Sarah, you're going to go through a summary of the scoring.
We're gonna go back and give you the opportunity to ask questions, make comments on what you've just heard. So first thing I want to mention about the scoring activity is that the initial design of our scoring matrix was set up to be evaluating one proposal against another. We did a little bit of reworking of the scoring activity. We kept the criteria completely intact, but the way that the scoring matrix is set up is that what we were actually scoring and evaluating was the degree to which our first read of the proposal actually met your guiding principles, your goals, and the provisions that we had laid out in the RFP. So just to clarify that. The scoring was a 1 to 5, excuse me, with 1 being does not meet any of the criteria and a 5 being greatly exceeds the criteria. And especially want to point out number 3 meets all criteria, because I'm going to explain something about that in a moment when I review the preliminary scoring. Now we're calling this preliminary scoring because at this point we have a proposal. So we have something in writing that is responding to our RFP, but we have a lot of vetting and a lot of questions to ask and more information gathering to do should we move forward in this process. And so we may well come back to this scoring and do another round of it once we have some additional information. So one thing I want to point out about this slide is that it's actually 4 out of the 5 commissioners that have now scored it. We had one commissioner who turned in their scores very late in the day, and unfortunately the header of the slide did not get changed. So it's 4 of the 5. One of the commissioners, Commissioner Pollard, abstained from the scoring activity. So let me just quickly run through how this works. So these scores here are the averages. Now, it's an average score based on the staff scoring, which was these 3 here, so Steve, Kim, and Tom, and the consultant's scoring, and the commissioner's scoring. So that's how we arrived at the averages, again using that 1 to 5 scale. And this is the roll-up. You may recall that we did the scoring at the more detailed level underneath each of these criteria, but this is the roll-up at the actual criterion level. So the first criteria was the degree to which the RFP respondent's strategic vision for Snoqualmie Valley Hospital optimizes the attributes that we had spelled out, in the RFP. And the roll-up and then the average score was 3.3. Now the average weight is just your commissioner weighting activity that we did earlier in the process, right after you all agreed on these criteria. Steve and I went through the weighting activity with you, and so that's the average weight. Now, what this number is here is to give you a reference point. So if you were to multiply this average weight by 3, remember 3 meets all criteria. That is kind of the baseline number that you would be expecting. So as the basis, this is what we would want to see for each of the criteria if it was at the meets level. The total actual score is the average score times the average weight. And so basically the takeaway message here is that for each of these, you see numbers in this column that are higher than the numbers in this column. And just looking, sort of the more simple view is just looking at the average scores. Everything is seeming to come in just above a 3. So I talked about the first criteria, about the strategic vision. The second one was the RFP respondents demonstrated willingness to embrace the guiding principles and goals of affiliation. And the third one was the district board's assessment of best organizational fit based on all of the various things that information we asked regional to provide about their organization. The district board's assessment of the transaction structure and the degree to which the terms sort of met what we had proposed in terms of the transaction provisions that we worked through with you prior to drafting the RFP. And then the fifth was any other criteria that the district deems important. So there were several of you who identified some things in the proposal that we didn't necessarily ask for, but that you found particularly interesting and things that could potentially benefit Snoqualmie Valley Hospital. So this is the quick synopsis of the scoring.
Question.
Yes.
Is there any way that we could break out the commissioners' responses vis-a-vis the staff responses?
We have that information, Jean, yes.
Is that part of your presentation?
It's not part of our presentation because it's a pretty detailed spreadsheet, so I was trying to find the right synopsis for a slide. However, we have that information, we happen to provide it. Yeah. What I will say in general, just in comment, that overall the commissioner's scoring was actually higher than the combination of the staff and consultant scoring. Not across the board on every single sub-element, but when you roll things up to the averages, absolutely. Oops. Okay. So a quick summary of the feedback that we heard from you in our individual meetings with you. So we started those last Thursday and wrapped up the last of them day before yesterday. And I've broken this out in terms of sort of the positive impressions and things that you shared, and then the things that are either, maybe not so positive, a little bit of a concern, or things around which you felt you really needed to get some additional information and do some probing. So in terms of the positives, one of the things that came out in a few of the individual meetings was that the strategic vision really appears to be in alignment with Snoqualmie Valley Hospital and the community and the market. There was one comment about the advantage of potentially being part of a smaller system versus a really large mega health system, for example, like a Providence or something like that. Because you are a small organization and because you are a community-focused organization, there was some concern that if it had been a larger system, you might sort of not get as much of a seat at the table. Willingness to engage the board in integration planning. You recall that was actually part of the guiding principles and something that came up in a couple of the individual meetings. Commitment to local care. So one of the things that Regional did mention a few times in their proposal is that because they're mothership, if you will, is a bit of a distance from here. And because of kind of their model of growth, that what they would be looking at doing is trying to maximize you seeing your full potential here in this community and not necessarily, taking any of that volume or redirecting any of it to their larger facilities. There was one comment about the words regional health and a feeling that that sort of conveyed community, and it conveyed something beyond sort of acute care and taking care of sick people, but really promoting health. And then several of you commented on the more recent affiliation experience, which Regional did outline in their proposal. So on the sort of questionable concern side of the comments that we heard, pretty much across the board, all of you, this is a place where they didn't score as well. This is a young health system. The individual organizations inside the system, some of them have some history, but not the system itself. It only formed in 2016. The fact that it's not geographically contiguous was something that came up. So while there may be, noting this advantage over here, there definitely could be advantages to having a larger organization that was in a geographically contiguous market in terms of the kinds of things that you could do together. And then there were a number of different things that came up that you all indicated you felt we needed to either clarify or confirm. One I'm going to mention now, and after I get through this list, I'll have Steve or Tom comment on, which is the bond covenant restrictions on the kind of the two different proposed structures, the lease versus the outright acquisition. Ongoing legal obligations of the district, so really making sure, and this is partly to the point that David made earlier, that if in fact the assets of the organization and the operations of the organization are going to be managed by another party, that the district would like to be free of some of these important legal obligations. So that's something to explore further. Some of you were curious about, okay, so what would be the plan for growth and integration of services? There were a lot of cool things proposed in the response, but how would they go about accomplishing that? And then, of course, everyone commented on, we need to really do some digging and make sure that there is financial strength in this organization, so that this type of an affiliation could be a sustainable long-term benefit for the district. And then finally, a few of you were curious about the governance model that was proposed in the response. So I want to just come back to two of these really quick, and one of them is the bond covenant piece, and I don't know if Steve or Tom wants to take this one.
It's right up the alley of any good CFO, so.
All right.
Steve and I did do some work on that in the last week, but Steve, go ahead and you can talk about those provisions and restrictions.
Yeah, we have provisions in our documents that were signed when we issued the revenue bonds. They're called bond covenants. And there are restrictions on what you can do for the advantage of the bondholders. And one of the restrictions is in a lease situation, as you interpret it, the cost will increase with a lower bond rating of the affiliate partner. Bond ratings are what rating agencies, A is the top.
The cost of the lessee.
The cost of the lessee.
Yeah.
A is the top, B is second, then there's unrated. It appears that Regional is not rated. They do not have a bond rating. It would therefore cost them 140% of our revenue bond debt service as a lease cost, about $5.1 million a year. If they had a lower level bond rating, or a higher bond rating of B, which is kind of the middle between low and A, it would cost them 120%. If they had an A rating, it would cost them 105%. So because of their lack of a bond rating, it's going to be more expensive for them to lease the hospital. And this is to protect the bondholders and protect their investment in the bonds. Question, Gene?
Question, we didn't have a bond rating when we
No.
went out.
Yeah.
So, we're saying, okay, we didn't have a bond rating, and now we're going to involve somebody that doesn't have a bond rating. Why is there a difference?
There's no difference. We didn't have a bond rating and we were able to sell bonds. It cost us more.
It cost us
It's
more.
got a higher interest rate because we were not rated.
But if we were to affiliate with Regional of Yakima, there would be another additional cost because they're not rated.
Right, let me comment on that. So when we issued our bonds, as you can imagine, the organization that helped us with that, Piper Jaffray, did a very extensive evaluation of us. And they provided that in a prospectus to the potential bond buyers. So that very detailed analysis of our ability to service those bonds gave the bondholders some level of security and a sense that we could actually do that.
Was that a de facto bond rating?
It's not a bond rating. It's
I understand.
It's an analysis that goes into the
But
prospectus.
it served as kind of a bond rating.
Served as information that any organization, rated or not, has done. Everybody has it done when they issue bonds. But my point here is that analysis on us is not what the bondholders get in the lease. They don't get to have their opportunity to drill in to the lessee organization. So they express that in, well, if I can't do an in-depth evaluation of them, I want it in a little higher price. It's all about risk and
You say a
return.
higher price.
Oh,
I'm very confused about what you both have been talking about.
So
5 million,
okay.
4 million, what are you talking about? The restricted cash? What are you talking
No,
about?
we're talking about
No.
the monthly, the annual payment to lease the facility. The annual payment at that 1.4 would be an annual payment from them of 5.1 million. It would be less expensive annually if they had a B rating or an A rating.
Even a rating of any.
No, A rating is a letter. Yeah.
So what are we at,
You've got A, B, and none.
3.75?
What?
We got 3.75 million now?
That's the amount, what?
Today,
We
what's
have
our annual
bond-
payment?
What our interest payment is right now, our bond debt service is about 3.67 million.
Do they know about this?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
And this is independent of your coverage ratio.
Right. Yeah.
It's very much related, Steve.
Good.
It's basically, so the revenue bonds continue to be serviced under the lease scenario, they continue to be serviced by the district using the lease payment from Regional in this scenario to make those payments. What the indenture document says is that the district would have to receive enough funds from Regional in order for it to have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.4.
Okay.
So,
But if you did that through your own earnings and met the 1.4 times coverage ratio, would they have to pay more?
when you say you, who are you talking about?
Let's say that the hospital standalone.
Yeah.
What is your coverage ratio now?
Right now, our required coverage ratio is 1.2.
Okay, and let's say it would go up to what would it go up to?
With an unrated lessee, it goes up to 1.4.
Okay. So let's say that you improve your earnings and have a 1.4 times coverage ratio. Would they have to pay more in the lease payment? Let's say you just lowered your costs and got a 1.4
So
times
to be
coverage.
clear, the debt service coverage ratio is imposed upon the district. Okay, the district leases its facility to regional. Regional's unrated. Therefore, the district's debt service coverage ratio goes to 1.4. Okay, so the lease payment from regional needs to cover that amount in order for the district to hit the 1.4.
Because the majority of the district's costs will be debt service if we lease the hospital.
That's the district's source of income in addition, of course, to the tax revenue, but it has to hit a 1.4, and that will be expressed in a higher lease payment from.
If you don't meet it otherwise, it would have to be a higher lease payment to cover.
Right.
Correct, but the advice that I would give to our commissioners is that you make sure the lease payment keeps you at a 1.4 debt service coverage ratio.
Yeah, I can understand
I'm glad Steve
All
can
right.
understand that because I don't pretend to, but you got the experts here, so that's good.
But it's one more thing we'll look into and make sure we clarify.
Thank you.
So the other one that I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on here is the governance model. So this is something that Steve and I spoke with you all about in early work study sessions. And just want to kind of recap because there seemed to be a little bit of confusion with the proposed governance model. So in this scenario, what you have asked is for the potential affiliate organization to step up to your debt and to take over and assume full responsibility for operations of the hospital and clinics. And in doing so, an organization who steps into that sort of a situation is absolutely going to want to have its own governing board. In this case, what Regional has indicated is that they would, two things that they've indicated. Number one, that they do see an ongoing continued role for the district, which Steve clarified in his earlier slides. And number two, that certainly, your input on, who would be the people, the board would be representative of the community, and that your input would be considered in the process of the board formation. So I just wanted to kind of call that out. And in terms of your, the district's ongoing role, which again, there's a couple of those bullet points on Steve's slide about the transaction structure spoke to this. But, there were a lot of things that you all expressed as things that you'd like to continue to play a role in with regard to community health and education and other things like that. And there was, I think, a good faith effort in the proposal to address the way in which Regional would envision partnering with you to do that. So that's all I'll say on that piece.
Are we going to discuss these things as we
Yes.
go along? Or
Yep.
what?
Yep.
What's the program?
Here we go. Here comes the discussion.
Well, I mean, the points that were just up on the screen, can we discuss those before you move on?
Sure. Yes, in fact, that's really what we wanted to do. We have two questions for you. The second question is this, but we can start with the second question if you'd like.
Well, if we start with the second question, I'd like to see the previous screen.
I'm gonna go back to the previous screen for
That's
you.
what I'm asking, thank you.
I would like to ask the question though. The question is, did our summary of commissioner feedback adequately capture your thoughts? So, that's
Do
gonna
you
be our
want an
main
answer
question.
before we move back to the screen?
Yes, that's what we are here to discuss.
Well,
so
I'm just
that-
beginning my research and then to answer the question, the word, no. But I'd like to address some of these items.
Okay,
I'm concerned about the governance model in the sense that the people who are paying the taxes are not going to have a vote on who serves on regional health of Yakima's board. And that concerns me.
correct.
But isn't, you had mentioned that they will have the commissioner be involved in terms of who those people that's in the community, that the commissioners will have a, part in, on the governance level, right?
Yes, so,
They would, but regional health would appoint those boards.
Yes, I understand,
With
but
the
we
input of
can
the
have
commission.
input on
And they would be
community members that we
yes.
think might be appropriate for
Yes.
our community.
Well, right,
Would
yeah.
they be the same as board members, or would we be drawing from the community
Trustees.
to fill those positions? Would they be drawing from the community to fill those positions, perhaps with suggestions from us?
yes, that is what they have said in their proposal,
Right, that I
yes,
understand.
yes.
Well, I got the impression that they say that current board members could be appointed to their board of directors.
I didn't read that, I read
Might
a
check
little
that out.
bit more loosely. I mean, I don't think that means that none of you could or would be considered, I
You're a
just think
citizen of
it
the
means.
community, I think you're one of the people that could be considered.
Correct. Yeah, and let me just say, Jean, to this point, this is basically the model that is out there for the vast majority of these public-private sort of comings together, affiliations like this. So when a community health system brings a public hospital district into the mix, and when there is either turnover of assets or a long-term lease, and the larger organization or the affiliating organization is going to take over operations, this is quite customary. And there are, you know, a lot of models out there, some very close by, like the one in Edmonds, where, you know, there can be a quite robust role for the district. Now, that example
It's the
is one
verdict.
that is
It's the
fairly
verdict.
rich because of the deal, and the terms of the deal, but nonetheless, the kinds of things that you would be interested in continuing to engage in around the community would be, you know, certainly on the table. And then the important piece here on this slide that Steve covered was that there would be regular reporting to the district board so that you felt comfortable that the organization was in fact being run appropriately.
But I think it goes without saying, the more that someone has to assume, the more control they want. I mean, that's kind of
So that would take away the election process.
No,
No, I don't think it is.
No, but our board of directors, as I understand it, would be kind of a shadow only to approve sale of property and the surplus of property, very minor things. We wouldn't be at all in the position that we are now. And I'm concerned that once these are appointed, with or without suggestions from the board, there is no term limit, there's no opportunity to vote on them. They could just continue forever. There are a lot of problems, and I think we also should contact the 70.44, the state law pertaining to public hospital districts, and make sure we're in compliance with that. But people in the valley are not going to be happy with de facto taxation without representation. If it's diluted by a board from Yakima, where the vast majority are Yakima people, and maybe we have a token couple that are appointed, but no opportunity for the voters to.
I think those are really good comments, and I think that is excellent thought process, but I think we're looking at that in terms of the due diligence portion of this, in that we gotta look and see what Yakima is all about, regional health.
We do.
When we did it.
I agree.
And so I think there's gonna be, I believe, if I'm wrong, a due diligence period of time that the entire board is gonna wanna really do some research and look at what's going on.
That's well in advance of any consideration of a LOI, letter of intent, right?
I don't know when that, I believe so, I believe it would have to be before a letter of intent, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure of that.
So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think we envision
So those are really
a few
good,
different
I
touch points.
appreciate those comments.
Yeah.
So,
I did want to just comment on one thing, which is something we should add to our list of questions. Because I'm not sure this level of detail was in the proposal, but in my experience, it's customary for community health system boards to have term limits. And usually those are staggered term limits, and they're done in such a way that you have, people who have the depth of experience, but you have a lot of new, fresh ideas coming onto the board to inform the board. The other thing that happens in community health system board formation quite typically is there's a very deliberate attempt to have a pretty broad cross-section of representation in terms of what you're bringing to the board. So that's, again, a generalization.
Well, I'm glad we're going to discuss this in more detail.
We're gonna have some questions about it. All right. What else? Any other pieces that we missed in terms of your
I'm
feedback?
still uncomfortable about the redacted version where we've got no financials that can be made public. And moreover, 2 paragraphs at least of the narrative have been deleted that I don't think really have any financial considerations or operational considerations. In other words, I don't think that under state law, they are really allowed to be exempted. And so I just want to express that I'm very uncomfortable that maybe key issues of the financial aspect, and who knows what's in the redacted version of those paragraphs that were blacked out, it cannot be made public. I just don't feel
But I think that is another position that we're taking is to do our due diligence, to look at, I know that we only have three years of the financials because it's very new. So we're looking at maybe the last
There are
5
many
years of
questions
each of
around that.
those-
There are
each of
many,
those three,
there are many
systems.
questions around that in terms of
Yeah.
what we'll have to have before.
There's gonna be some
Yeah.
requests from them.
Yeah.
And that's part of our due diligence, and we're gonna get more information back to us. As far as those 2 paragraphs, I mean, I've done some, transactions with some larger corporations, and you don't get anything. You don't get anything. This is pretty transparent. And a couple of paragraphs that they withheld.
Well, I
It's
can't-
really not a big deal, and it's really something that we shouldn't even be looking at. I mean, it's so irrelevant as to what you and I have to do as far as our due diligence. Because you saw it, I saw it, we read it. We have to be the ones that the constituents trust. So you have to look at it, I have to look at it, and we have to make our decisions based on everything we know.
To large, pardon me, Madam President.
Except that they're a nonprofit, correct? Is that, as a nonprofit, their financials are available.
No, they're not.
They're not, they used to be,
No, there's no.
because that's where Overlake, I got their financials.
No, the 501c3 organization, their financials,
Yes.
they are obligated to complete what's called a 990 report. And
Okay.
the 990 does provide a very high-level financial, and those are available to the public, the 990.
Okay,
And so anybody can get a 990 on a 501c3.
Yeah.
But the full audited financials are not required to be, they're not subject to the same kind of
scrutiny.
No, the same requirements as a public hospital district for release of information. They're not subject to public records requests.
Okay,
And their financials will be available on the Department of Health file.
The
Once
other
again,
ones.
It's not with the footnotes, but it's much more detailed financial information with departmental information.
Department of Health, yeah.
Yeah, so let me speak though more directly to the concern. And I'll take the first piece and ask Tom to jump in on the second since Skip is not here today. But on the first piece, in terms of the redacted components, the RFP clearly laid out, and this was on advice of legal counsel, that any respondent could, in their proposal, have a cover page that indicated what they did not want to become public and what they considered to be confidential, and that there was a process laid out of what would happen if there was a public request for that information. So I think that's as much as I'll say, but in terms of the legal process, we have some steps in place here.
We do.
and some of those are legal processes that we employ and use for us. When we're talking about real estate, we're talking about certain negotiations. We do it in executive meetings, so it's not,
Oh, yeah, no, there's a good part, I think probably all the financials are legitimately redacted. It's the paragraphs. Now, maybe I'm especially sensitive to that because I think we should bend over backwards to be transparent because we have been criticized for many years for not being transparent and for tricking the public. And we've got to be sensitive to, I mean, no matter what we do, no matter who we come up with as a partner, if the people don't buy it, they're not gonna come to our hospital.
So I'll comment on where we are in the process. First of all, the redaction has been done correctly, and we confirmed that with regional. Before we made a redacted version of the proposal available to anybody, we sent that redacted version back to regional to make sure that we had done the redaction according to the instruction that was in the proposal. They confirmed that it was done correctly. We actually did release the redacted version to someone who had issued a public records request. And as I mentioned at the beginning of tonight's session, we are providing it to the public. The process for maintaining that redaction is that by the 23rd of September, regional would have to pursue a protection order in Superior Court. And the way, interestingly, the way that happens is that they sue us. It's just part of the steps. And I've indicated to regional that we will not take umbrage at that because that's the process. That is the stated next step if they want to go through that. So if they do, then it goes in front of the Superior Court judge to decide whether or not the information that was redacted is legitimate. And specifically, as Skip has explained, does that information constitute confidential or proprietary information that would damage that business if released? And Skip has said there are very few cases where that information remains redacted. It's a very high bar in order to maintain that redaction. So that's where we're at in the process. We'll of course keep you all informed about what regional's intent is with respect to trying to continue to have that information redacted via a protection order.
And they have a deadline for doing that.
Yes, they do.
So, okay, so we were on question 2, which was, did the summary of feedback adequately capture your thoughts? And we've heard some additional thoughts and concerns from Commissioner Pollard. Anyone else?
I think it did. I think most everything that I talked with you about and after reviewing, I think I really think that looking at the scoring here, they actually did better than what we expected. And so I don't see why not continue the process at this point and see where it comes out.
Anyone else?
I would just like to reserve further comment until I get more research.
Of course.
Fair enough.
Is it the first?
Okay. Second, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to see which sheet David had, that was right up front.
Second to last or so on the small packet. It's on the back probably,
Okay.
1 pages.
So the question that we skipped over initially was, based on your review of the proposal, when we were providing the synopsis at the outset, which I will go back to those slides again as well, did we miss anything of significance in that synopsis? So,
678.
let me just, there we go. So, so this was kind of the summary overview of the proposal in terms of the two options, the goals that specifically were met, the one goal that perhaps was not entirely met but addressed around branding, and the commitment to growth in local services and an ongoing role for the district with regard to community health. And then Steve walked through some of the more detailed transaction provisions and the way that the response addressed those. So,
Sue, Sarah,
yes,
maybe this is the right opportunity to read a short email. It was unsolicited, it came to me from a person in the community very knowledgeable about finances. And I think this is very important to hear. It says here, it's obviously disappointing but utterly predictable that the district only received one proposal. I won't have firm comment until the public can actually see the proposal and assess the financial aspects. The qualitative aspects don't seem to make much sense, however. Do you really think that your constituents will find much affinity in a shop run out of Yakima? The main benefit of affiliation, outside of financial ones, is that a patient can seamlessly access the services of a large health network. Sounds oxymoronic, but regional is local. A deal wouldn't change the game and draw Swedish overlay patients into your hospital. The status quo would remain. Again, I'll withhold judgment on the proposal until the public can see and discuss it. If regional really wants to buy the Titanic before it hits the iceberg, I'd be more than okay with that as a taxpayer.
I think in the next public hearing, I would like to see that the regional health entity or person or representative could come and probably address many of these issues with the public so they can ask questions.
yep, that is part of the process, so.
I'd like to see
Public
that.
hearing, is that what,
Well, we have another public hearing down the road too. We're gonna land on the next step slide, but yes,
I
many things that have been
it would be-
suggested tonight that we've already sort of built in.
You
It
know,
would
though,
be beneficial for the community to listen to.
but the community could come tonight.
I know that, but maybe if there's a different person, that real person that is going to affiliate with us, I mean,
You mean
the
somebody from
the
the
regional,
affiliate?
from regional health.
Yeah.
That might pique
Entice
their
them.
interest, yes,
yeah, and this location has a chilling effect on
That
public
would be a good-
participation.
yeah.
So
Why
we'll
does it
need to
have a
picture
chilling
the sign.
effect? Does it mean it's chilling to come to the hospital?
What?
Why
I
does
say
it?
chilling effect because I know of people that have access problems. They don't like the idea that it's down hidden in the basement,
So,
as opposed to where we used to meet, which was in the city hall, as opposed to where we used to hold meetings, such as the fire station down in Fall City and so forth. I think, well, you tell me why people don't come. I
Our
think it's
elevator
because-
would accommodate
partly
100 people.
because of the location.
so just a
Okay,
moment,
Commissioner, believe me.
We
What?
wanna take, excuse me, commissioners, we wanna take one at a time. And I think it's somebody else's opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll just say that we, as Sarah was saying, public hearing is contemplated among our next steps. And what we've been talking about doing is public hearing both Upper and Lower Valley, so that we're really trying to, shorten the distance for people and provide that opportunity. So it is in our planning.
So we'll talk about some of these next steps, because there's a few things that have come up tonight, ideas that you've shared that we've kind of already built into a process that we want to share and make sure you're comfortable with. So any other things that you think we missed in our summary of the proposal?
I think it's been pretty covered in terms of what
Me too.
pretty much.
Commissioner Young, you haven't said anything this evening. Would you like to contribute?
No, I think that this is a good, I have some other questions about regional's understanding of what a district is. I have, that's all going to get clarified before anything happens.
Okay. Great. Yes.
This is a very minor thing, but maybe revealing, and that is when we ask the question, current bond rating and any changes to your bond rating or rating agency's outlook since the previous bond rating cycle, the answer we got was Regional Health and its subsidiaries currently have no long-term bond debt outstanding. That doesn't answer the question. But you did earlier verbally by saying they have no bond rating, but they did not say that.
Correct, and that was on one of our lists of follow-up questions, but in the process of clarifying the bond covenants and the restrictions around that surfaced.
Thank you.
Well, and as a new organization, they're not going to have bond.
Right.
Yeah, they
don't have long-term bonds
Well,
outstanding.
that's all I wanted them to say. Give
Yeah.
us a straightforward answer. Do you or do you not have a bond rating, and what is it?
That will all come out, and as we know, their dynamics are changing and we need to.
Okay, so I'm going to move us along if that's okay.
That's good.
All right. So next phase gate is information gathering, and Steve's gonna take you quickly through this so we can land on the timeline and next steps.
Now, this may be a new term that you're seeing for the first time, next phase gate. And we've used that very specifically because there are a number of gates along the way. And this is an evolutionary process. We're moving toward a letter of intent, but we'll have many different opportunities to stop and say, are we ready to move on to the next gate? And so, especially as Sarah comes back and talks about the timeline going forward, it'll be much more apparent where some of those gates are. So, and in fact, each step along the way, you as commissioners will be saying, do we take the next step? Or what are our alternatives? Do we take the next step? What are our alternatives? And that will be based on the information that you get and the information that's coming back to you. So that's part of it. But as far as the next gate, what we would be proposing is this information gathering process. And as part of that, the next thing we would do, and we'll highlight the areas of questions. We haven't written out the questions for you, but the areas of questions, and get your feedback on that. But we'll send questions to regional. Now, as you can imagine, these questions are kind of the global, the kinds of things we've been talking about, start the process of getting clarification around very significant, very key issues. And as you know, once we do that, then we'll have the opportunity to drill down. But you'll see this isn't going to be hundreds of detailed questions. We need to get big picture questions answered first, and that's where we're starting. We'll send the questions to regional. We'll schedule a conference call with their management team to hear their answers and get clarification, request any additional specific information, continue to vet information as needed, and have that dialogue, because that dialogue is important. And we want this to move so that we can get to the next process and the next step. And then we will be coming back to you and we'll report that first round of questions, our findings, any additional information back to the commissioners and staff. Now, the areas, and this is an area again that we'd like your input, but the initial questions around financial stability, some of the areas that Sarah highlighted were areas of kind of on the, we need further information, or on the minus side. Debt capacity, they commented on what their debt capacity was. Well, that may be as of a certain point in time. What do they foresee their debt capacity being, a year from now, 2 years from now, and so on. The proposed governance model, getting clarification around what that is. You've given us some feedback so that we can further refine the questions that we'll be asking. The relationships with Puget Sound providers, they made reference to that. We'd like to know more about that and how that plays out. And then the impact on existing clinical alliances. You have clinical alliances in place right now that are very important and playing a very significant role in your current financial success. So we'd like to know more about how might these impact those alliances.
Steve, maybe we should say impact on existing clinical and other alliances, because we have purchase
Sure.
alliances.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of.
Very good point, thank you. Then also the rebranding initiative that Regional has commented on, getting further clarification around that. Very important to us. Their vision for the swing bed program, they address many of those things. They're familiar with the kind of business that we are, and it's just getting further information. How do they really help us further optimize what we're doing? Capital investment, another key area. And then more on the lease purchase option. Just need to understand it more. Steve will follow up more, in terms of the coverage requirements, just what the implications of that might be, and bring that information back to you. And then, what else would you like us, again, big picture, higher level type questions, what other areas would you like us to address here?
I'd like to see a timeline
Okay?
from this point forward.
And will
A proposed timeline.
Yeah.
But, for example, when are we going to begin to start considering?
Sarah will cover that, Gene, but you let us know when Sarah covers that, if that addresses your thoughts or concerns.
My only question is it automatically a lease purchase? Can it be a lease and or purchase? I mean, if they sign a lease, is it gonna lead to a purchase?
Very good question, Joan. What they're proposing, it is a lease with an option to purchase at their option. Or if covenants and other things allow, the other option would be a purchase. So it is a lease with a purchase option or a purchase, or the two options that they have proposed. Now, as they said in their proposal, they would pursue either of those, working closely with the commissioners as to terms, conditions, and so on. So, other questions?
Joan, you had one earlier, I thought, a few minutes ago, related to their understanding of the district.
Yes, that's something I don't see in information gathering. I don't think they have a.
And that may come out further down the road.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep that in mind to make sure. And that might be one of the areas we just like them to express.
One of the things on the information gathering, I've looked at who they have in place on this strategic planning and their setup. There's some pretty big hitters that they have surprisingly in Yakima. And I've done some research on these folks, and I looked at some of their experience. The only thing I'm a little odd about is the guy that's heading it is a zoologist, so whether that matters, the CEO or not. But it would be nice to have some more information about those, their people, I think, and give that information to the board, because I think I want to have a little more understanding about, who I'm dealing with and what,
And David, is this management, board, both?
Both over there,
City of
to find
Yakima,
out
right?
how successful they could potentially be.
Okay.
And that's my bottom line. Will they be successful and why? And who am I dealing with?
I'm gonna go further in that. I would like to know what the economic situation is in Yakima, because I've had calls from people in Yakima they're not related to the hospital, they're related to the soccer fields. I've had 3 different calls in the last couple months about how did we do it, what did we do. So I know they're aggressive and upcoming ideas of what they want for their community. So I just wanna know how this fits with now they're looking at our hospital and they've also looked at our soccer fields. What is going on in that community?
Well, and related to that, I'd like to know what community organizations in Yakima are saying about the certificate of need that they just got on various conditions, and this plan to merge. By the way, they have recently bought up or somehow merged about a dozen to 15 healthcare providers in Yakima Valley, plus now they're bringing together 3 hospitals. And I think that's, I don't know whether they've digested all this.
No, that will definitely be on our radar screen.
Yeah.
It'll be,
I have one that may not be a serious matter right now. I'd like to know more about the religious beliefs. I know they touch a little bit of that on the RFP. You know, some of the issues like right to die or dignity.
Death with
The
dignity.
death with
Yeah.
dignity and all that. I just, it might be,
And
that's
we-
more of a future issue.
we will sort all of these out and we may look at it and say, does this fit better in this round of questions or next round or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
But I agree with Emma, I'd like to know.
And that's an important one.
I'd like to know their position on prescribing birth control pills and abortion in their existing hospitals, as well as their comments regarding death with dignity.
So just very quickly, having worked for a Catholic health system for many, many, many years, they are not a faith-based system, and so the basic answer to the question around the ethical and religious directives was not applicable because they're not bound to the ethical and religious directives. So they're
Well, I'd like to know what their ethical position is then on those issues that I just mentioned.
That's an ethical and moral dilemma.
Absolutely, I'm just saying that, other organizations have specific restrictions around birth control, around, terminating a pregnancy and things like that. This organization is not bound by those.
It's not bounded, it's told us that they will not tolerate death with dignity, which means our people, best care is close to home, will have to go to the University of Washington at $1,000 they'll have to pay, etc. So there are considerations about these things.
Correct, and we can put that down, to ask more questions and get more information. As I have shared with many of you in our individual meetings, it is quite common right after that death with dignity came up for health systems to take a stated stance against it in terms of what happens inside the walls of the hospital. And we have.
Well, we'll put that on the list. Other questions?
I don't know if the board realizes that we have taken that position, we have the same position they have. So it was a prior vote of the board back at the time that I-1000 came in. But that has been our position that's on.
Is that in our bylaws?
It is not in our bylaws, it's in policy.
Is it a resolution or where does it exist?
It's in our policies.
And it was a resolution.
Oh,
It was a board resolution.
We have just a few more minutes before Commissioner
Yes.
Spiker.
Spiker is going to be leaving, so we would like to
Great,
as much done as we can.
thank you for that. All right, so we have your input on the questions. If you think of any additional questions that you want to make sure we capture, you know how to reach us on email. In the meantime, I just wanted to quickly run through sort of what we're envisioning as next steps and timeline here and make sure that you are comfortable with it. So here's where we are today, so I won't go through that. The next touch point would be the September 14th board meeting. What we would be bringing to you then is a summary of what we have learned based on this next phase of information gathering. And determining readiness to select a finalist or select regional as the finalist. A vote on that if and as appropriate, if you're ready to vote on that. And then we would once again be covering what we see as the next steps and timeline. Then there would be a September work study session if the date worked and if in fact you did vote for regional to be the finalist, which was how we had outlined the process. Then regional would come and present their proposal, and that would be the first touch point that Commissioner Herron had requested in terms of having public opportunity to hear about that, as well as you ask all kinds of questions of regional. Then we would have the opportunity for commissioners to have some discussions and debrief. And then what would likely be here among the next steps is something that many of you have individually requested, which would be, we would be setting up one or more opportunities for you to get to know the people, the organization, perhaps a field trip, a tour, meeting their board and executive team, those kinds of things could come out of that process. This is assuming that after they present, it's assuming that they do present, and that after they do present, that you all would really like to get to know their organization better before moving on to the next
Are
step.
you talking about a field trip to Yakima?
Yeah.
Or to Sunnyside.
Well,
That is what
Sunnyside or one of the other.
Their headquarters, that's their
I'll
headquarters.
just render an opinion on this, and that is, Sunnyside reflects who they are, I think, more than anything. That's the organization that's been under this management team's direction and this board's direction for the past number of years. Yakima Yakima is coming in and reflects somebody else's effect on them. But Sunnyside will, I think, give us a really good feel for.
But isn't it true, regional was formed in December of 2016, and prior to that, Sunnyside was operated and directed by a firm out of Tennessee.
Same
Is that
people.
true?
Same people. It's all the same people.
These are the Tennessee people?
I'm just saying, the management team has not over.
Oh,
has
yes,
not turned over.
but the ownership and so forth and the direction came from an organization out of Tennessee. And that's why a lot of the people in
No,
Yakima
the
are
owner-
delighted to have a local organization.
I'll just say, the ownership and direction of Sunnyside is local, because they have a local nonprofit community board. The only thing that was coming out of Tennessee was a management contract for the CEO.
All right, so again, down in here somewhere, we would have some, what I'm calling sort of enculturation activities, which are really important in this process. And then the October 12th board meeting, and once again, this is laid out in such a way that it speaks to these sort of phase gates, but we're trying to do it in a fairly compressed time frame, given the sense of urgency we've heard from many of you. We would be bringing whatever additional information we had gathered through sort of the next step of getting more specific information, and considerations for a draft letter of intent, should you be ready to move in that direction at that point. And at that point, we would also be beginning to do some of the planning for a second public hearing. And what we had discussed previously is that the most likely and probably sensible point in the process to do that would be at the point of a letter of intent. Because there's no, letter of intent is a non-binding activity, but you've basically, gotten engaged and you want to have your community really understand and know the organization. So that is kind of what we've laid out in terms of timeline and next steps, and just want to make sure, see if you have any questions, suggestions, make sure you're comfortable with
Well,
what we're
I do have a comment. This is October 12th, so we're gonna be tight too, because by November 13th, we have to have our budget done. So that's, I guess we all need to be prepared for several different things that are major and what we need to do in the next couple months.
Do we have a date for the September workshop?
This stuff.
The 27th.
Third Wednesday.
Thanks, Val.
September 27th.
Okay.
That's the fourth.
Yeah, it is the 27th,
So it's the fourth, it's the 27th.
fourth Wednesday.
Now, I think the
Yes.
one thing that we need to make sure though is that, you know, if this is something we want to happen at that work session, then we're gonna need to
Make sure
move in the direction, making
Make sure
sure
they
that
can be
they're
here.
available to
Yeah.
actually implement it.
Yeah.
We can't bring them here for every meeting, so is it the best use of them to come for a work session, or shall we do they plan to come also to the public hearings, or how does this work out?
Well, like I said, Jean, the public hearing would be a little bit later in the process.
Right.
However, the public is welcome to come and hear
Would they be
presentation.
present at the public hearings is what I'm asking.
Oh, yes, the whole point of the public hearing would be kind of a get to know.
Okay, I just like to comment that I think we're rushing this awfully. Now, a couple of years ago, Mr. Spiker's proposed a change to the bylaws whereby the board should get the written material for a meeting 1 week in advance. And we've tried to do that, although we haven't always succeeded, but you have here a written summary of your initial information gathered. And you would need to provide that to us by, that we met that, the goal, by September the 7th. And we've had so many questions here tonight that we've got to work through. I don't think that you can do that in a week and give us a report a week in advance of the meeting.
You can give it a good try.
Well, we're already in the, we took the liberty of asking for some dates so that we can get our call scheduled with them.
Okay, so we will get in approximately 1 week in advance of the September 14th meeting, your written summary of initial information.
You'll get whatever we have in advance.
That's a good answer, Gene. You'll get whatever we have.
That's why.
That's the best answer I can give you.
Nothing more.
That's good.
Yeah, we just, if you don't have it, I would prefer to get.
You don't have it,
before the meeting.
Is there any other discussion that Commissioner Spikers wants to be a part of? We have public comment and then upcoming meetings.
Comment, he has to stay longer because it was late. I'm just kidding.
Good luck, is there?
If you want to leave now, it's
What
up
else
to
do
you.
we have?
Well, ask for public comment.
Oh, no, I'll wait for public comment. I don't wanna
Is
hear.
there any public comment?
Yep.
Okay.
Somebody.
I'll be brief. First of all, I would like to say that it's my observation that Sarah and Steve have just been doing a brilliant job with this. It's organized, it's a great structure, it makes a lot of sense. I think the board and the district has been well served by them. In that there were just so few organizations that responded to the RFP. I think there might be some value in sponsoring or supporting an independent postmortem to find out exactly what it is that caused them to not have the interest that we thought that they might have. I'd also like to make a comment about the Verdant model.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'd like to make a comment about the Verdant model.
Verdant.
And that is that it sounds like that's in play, given this proposal. I sincerely hope so. I think that the people in Edmonds are wildly supportive of it. They like the community health, and that the thought that taxation without representation in that was something that was brought up early on and was dismissed as a red herring. I might even suggest that you invite someone from Verdant Healthcare to come down and talk to you about their experience with it. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would they do otherwise? In terms of a public hearing, I would suggest that you consider broadcasting it live over the internet. It's very easy to do. I do live broadcasts every week. That's the way that I believe that you can reach the people in Snoqualmie Valley, rather than to try and have them come to someplace like this. And then finally, I'd encourage you to keep track of the comments and what's posted in SVH Forum. And if you need to navigate to that, all you have to do is Google SVH Forum, and that should be the top return on your Google search. Thank you.
Is there any more discussion? If there's no more discussion, then I will make note that our upcoming meetings are regular business meeting Thursday, September 14th, 2017 at 6:30 at Snoqualmie Valley Hospital, and our next work session will be September 27th, 2017 at 6 p.m. I suspect in the same place. Do I have a motion to
Make a
adjourn?
motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Good luck, Jay.